So how did the young William Shakespeare have his first experience of theatre? There are 2 or 3 possible answers to that question. For one thing, at school, the boys would have performed short plays in Latin, so he would have had the opportunity to act from a very young age, though probably not in front of an audience apart from his fellow pupils. Secondly, and most interestingly, this was a time when touring players travelled throughout the country, visiting many market towns, including Stratford-upon-Avon. And indeed, during the time when Shakespeare's father John was Chamberlain, keeping the accounts of the Corporation of Stratford, there was a marked increase in the number of visits from travelling players. I'm looking here at the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust at a quite remarkable document. It is the actual account book of the Stratford Corporation from the time when Shakespeare's father was Chamberlain. And it records all the payments that were made. And at this page here, I've got a reference to a payment made to the Queen's players for 20 shillings. That was a lot of money at the time. And indeed, if we look at the period when John Shakespeare was involved with the council, more and more we see the players coming to Stratford. The Queen's players, who at the time were the leading company in the land, but other companies as well. The Earl of Worcester's men, for instance. From 1569, for the next 10 years or so, precisely the time when Shakespeare was between the age of 5 and 15, the players would have come to Stratford and they would have performed in the town hall. This surely would have been Shakespeare's first experience of theatre. The fact that his father was a senior figure on the town council meant that he would have had a front row seat. Interestingly, in later years, the Stratford Corporation took a markedly Puritan, extreme Protestant turn, and the Puritans never liked theatre. And so, at a later stage, by which time Shakespeare was acting in London, the Stratford Corporation actually prevented actors from performing. Ironically enough, in 1622, a few years after Shakespeare's death, his own company, the King's Men, passed through Stratford on one of their tours, and they were paid by the corporation not to put on a play. There's a fascinating passage in A Midsummer Night's Dream that provides a glimpse of the third possible way in which Shakespeare first had exposure to theatre. Plays were not only put on for the public, they were also put on for the royal family and the aristocracy for special occasions. And during Shakespeare's youth, there was an amazing occasion at Kenilworth, which was the castle just up the road from Stratford, owned by the Earl of Leicester, Queen Elizabeth's favourite. She paid a great spectacular visit to Kenilworth, and Leicester arranged all sorts of entertainments for her, including dramatic performances. The passage in Midsummer Night's Dream comes at the moment when Oberon, the king of the fairies, is describing to Puck, his agent, the origin of the magical flower called love in idleness. This is the magic flower, you remember, that when it's put on someone's eyes, when they awaken, they fall in love with the first person that they see. And Oberon provides an explanation of the origin of its magical powers. He suggests that the powers come from the dart of Cupid, the god of love, which was originally aimed at a fair queen, but then it was diverted and she remained a virgin queen, and it fell on the flower love in idleness instead. Let's have a close look at the passage. Thou rememberest since once I sat upon a promontory and heard a mermaid on a dolphin's back, uttering such dulcet and harmonious breath, that the rude sea grew civil at her song, and certain stars shot madly from their spheres to hear the sea maid's music. That very time I saw, but thou couldst not, flying between the cold moon and the earth, Cupid all armed. A certain aim he took at a fair vestal throned by the west, and loosed his love shaft smartly from his bow, as it should pierce 100,000 hearts. But I might see young Cupid's fiery shaft quenched in the chaste beams of the watery moon, and the imperial votress pass it on in maiden meditation, fancy free. So the force of the chastity, the maiden quality of the imperial votaress diverts Cupid's fiery shaft, and as I say, it lands on the flower, and that's the origin of the story of the flower's magic. But there's no doubt here that the fair vestal throned by the West, who is chaste, that this is a reference to Queen Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen. And the thing that specifically links it to the Kenilworth festivities is the earlier image of the mermaid on the dolphin's back, the idea of the sea growing civil at the song of the mermaid, because this was precisely one of the scenes that was acted out for the Queen at the Kenilworth festivities of the Earl of Leicester. And we know from records of the time that people from all around the region came to Kenilworth hoping to get a glimpse of the Queen, certainly getting a chance to have a look at what the actors were getting up to in this spectacular performance. So it may well be that this is a memory of Shakespeare, the young Shakespeare, visiting Kenilworth.